Here we are at concept 34.8. This will be our last concept for the chapter. It's a big chapter, I know, with lots of information. But again, keep in mind we're going to focus on the various groupings and what makes the groups unique or distinct from the other groups, and we're not going to get bogged down in the details of the particular species. Concept 34.8 says humans are mammals, of course, that have a large brain and bipedal locomotion. The species that we belong to, Homo sapiens, which would be the species for all human beings, is about 200,000 years old, which sounds pretty old, but we know it's not. If we think about the history of the Earth, the history of life on Earth, considering that life has existed on this planet for at least 3.5 billion, probably closer to about 3.8 billion, 200,000 years is not a very long length of time. It's just a dot. If the entirety of the known universe, from the beginning, the Big Bang till now, and if you've been watching the news, you saw some really fascinating new information that just came out about inflation theory and the Big Bang. But from that time period of the known beginning of the universe until the present day, if we were to compress that entire time period into a calendar year, 365 and 1/4 days, well then human beings, Homo sapiens, didn't arise until the last day of the year, December 31st. And what we would consider modern civilization, where we have writing and painting and the types of things that you think of as modern human civilization, that only makes up the last 14 seconds of the year. So modern civilization, everything you know and have read and all the people you've heard about, only existed in the last 14 seconds of this calendar year, 11:59 and 46 seconds. Everyone we've heard of, all the ancient Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, and then on up into Europe and Shakespeare, and all the people and the wars and all the history you've studied would only amount to the last 14 seconds of that calendar year. So the time that we've been here is very, very short in comparison to all the other creatures that we have been talking about. Derived characters of humans. A number of characteristics distinguish humans from other apes. We have a more upright posture. We tend to stand and walk and move more upright in bipedal locomotion. Apes like gorillas and chimpanzees can walk on their hind feet or hind legs, and they sometimes do. But oftentimes they are down on all fours as well, where that is pretty rare for humans. Larger brains capable of much more complex thought, language, symbolic thought, artistic expression, the manufacture and use of complex tools. You don't want to just say tools, because most of the apes use tools in a variety of ways, but we have obviously far more complex tools. I mean, most chimpanzees could not develop and build and use a computer and the internet. That would be a complex tool. Reduced jaw bones and jaw muscles, and a shorter digestive tract when compared to some of the other apes. The human and chimpanzee. The chimpanzee would be the living extant creature that is most closely genetically related to us. Of course, you would never want to say that humans evolved from chimpanzees. That's kind of silly. No existing species evolved from a currently existing species. It's certainly true that we share a common ancestor not too far back in the distant past, and that we share a huge amount of genetic information with them, but we didn't evolve. Two currently living species couldn't have evolved from each other. So the human and chimpanzee genome are very similar, about 99% identical, and you would think, well, how are we so different? If you look at a chimpanzee and you look at a human, how does only 1% make such a big difference? But you have to keep in mind that some of that 1% are these Hox genes, these regulatory genes, these master control genes. And one tiny little change in these regulatory genes can lead to large numbers of changes in some of the other genes. So changes in regulatory genes can have a large effect, and humans and chimpanzees differ in the expression of about 19 regulatory genes. Now that's a very small percentage of the entire genetic code, but it can lead to some very vast physical and morphological differences. These differences separate humans from current extant living apes, of course, but many of our characteristics emerged long ago, emerged in our ancestors long before our own species appeared. So long before Homo sapiens appeared, there were other creatures similar to current Homo sapiens in our lineage that kind of led to us. Some of those creatures died out. You got to think, this is the tree of life, and we are the end of a currently still existing twig. Some of the other twigs didn't make it this far and they died off. And so it's not like a straight line from archaea and bacteria to humans. It's a very branched and twisted line, and some of the branches have died long ago. We are one of the tips of one of those existing branches. The study of human origins is a fascinating study. It's known as paleoanthropology. So you're kind of mixing the study of ancient humans with the study of paleontology, so it's called paleoanthropology. Homonyms, which is the word we use for these closely related to human creatures. We used to call them hominids, but now they're called hominins. Either one would be fine with me. They are more closely related to humans than to chimpanzees. So the creatures that we're going to talk about that existed prior to Homo sapiens, they are not chimpanzees. They are more like current humans than they are like current chimpanzees. Paleoanthropologists have discovered fossils of about 20 different species of extinct hominins, and this is a hot area of study and debate. So you may find that some scientists say there's only 15 different species, and some will say no, there's 23. And of course we don't have a complete fossil record, so we are having to go off of what we find. But the good news is we continue to find more information every day, and we continue to strengthen the data set that we have. So here's an example of some of these creatures. Some of these creatures look far more like current day humans than others. So as you move along, Homo sapiens would be up here at the top, and this is like millions of years ago, a timeline. So you can see Homo sapiens here at the top, and there are overlapping points of time. There were times in previous history where more than one variety of hominin existed at the same time. Oftentimes not necessarily in the same part of the world, but in some cases yes. For example, the Neanderthals that you have probably heard of. The Neanderthals and Homo sapiens for a long period of time existed together in the same time period, and even overlapped in their range, and there is quite a bit of evidence that shows they even interbred. Homo erectus, the first hominin to leave Africa, may have even had some overlapping time period with Neanderthals as well. We're not quite sure about that. So here are some of the various hominin species that are related to us. It's not a direct line of descendants. These are all, again, various branches that lead off in different directions. One of these branches eventually kind of led to us. Hominins originated in Africa about 6 to 7 million years ago, and early hominids are less like us than later hominids. They show evidence of small brains and increasing bipedalism. So they were walking more upright. They had larger brains than, say, a chimpanzee, or again, not a current chimpanzee, but the ancient ancestor of a chimpanzee, but not as large of a brain as a current human. Note that the characteristics that we think of as being identifiers for humans, like this is what it means to be a human, this didn't come in some sort of smooth line, some sort of smooth progression. Again, this was a very highly branched tree of life, so there was not one smooth line that led up to humans, and there were various points at which there were numerous hominids that existed on the earth at the same time. Here is a skeleton named Artie, just they've given it the nickname Artie. It's a 4.4 million year old hominid. Would not be very close to us, would not be very similar to us, current day human, but it is a hominid, and it's more like us than it would have been like an ancient chimpanzee relative. So there are some misconceptions, of course, when you deal with evolution and the evolution of human beings. You oftentimes get a number of misconceptions. We don't have the time to address them all. I am happy to address them. If you have particular questions, just let me know and I can lead you to some great information. I would stress to you that when you study evolution and when you study the evolution of human beings, you have to put it into the context of everything else that we've studied. And I am happy to give you good scientific information that will provide you with the facts that we have. So the facts are some of the following. Let's get rid of some misconceptions. The first misconception is that early hominids were chimpanzees. So some people look at these ancient fossils and they say, well, that's just a chimpanzee. That's not a human-like creature. But that's not correct. The correction is that hominids and chimpanzees shared a common ancestor. We are not direct descendants of chimpanzees, but at some point in the past, both the chimpanzee and the human being shared a common ancestor, and then there was a split at some point, and then there was a branch that eventually led to chimpanzees, and there were all sorts of changes along the way, and there was a branch that led to human beings, and there were all sorts of changes along the way. Some of the twigs died out, one of the twigs survived, and that's us. So chimpanzees represent the tip of a separate branch of evolution, just like we are the tip of a separate branch of evolution, and the acquired derived characteristics of our of both groups came about in different evolutionary paths, but we did share a common ancestor in the not too distant past, and you can look at that through morphological data and certainly through genetic data that we have today. The other misconception that a lot of people make is that human evolution is like some smooth straight line, like a ladder excuse me, a ladder leading from, say, monkeys to humans. And I think a lot of that comes from this sort of picture or cartoon that many people have seen before, this march of progress leading to a more upright creature, leading to a modern day human. We know that that's not how it works. That's not how evolution works. That's not how biology works. It's not one clean single path leading from one creature to the next. It is, again, think of it as a tree of life, many different branches, and some of those branches die off and some of them survive, and it's twisted and there's turns, so it's not a straight progression. Hominid evolution included many different branches, coexisting species, and most of them, or all of them, eventually died out, leaving only one existing branch currently, and that would be us. Now fast forward to, say, another million years in the future, and there may be other human-like creatures. Homo sapiens may not be the ones around anymore, but today, as of right now, 2014, we are the existing lineage. There was no steady march of progress with us as an end goal. Evolution has no end goal. There's no target that it's trying to hit. We just happen to be the surviving member of one part of a highly branched evolutionary tree. So let's take a look at some of these hominins, beginning with some of the more ancient ones and then leading up to some of the more modern ones. Australopithecus. Man, I'll have to get to that word. This particular assemblage of hominins, this is a grouping of hominins, lived between about 4 and 2 million years ago. This was a period in which we see a great diversity in hominins. We see a number of different kinds of hominids during this time. So the Australopiths, there were a number of these different hominids. Some species such as, man, I'm going to struggle with these words, Australopithecus afarensis. Australopithecus afarensis walked fully upright and erect, much more like a modern human. And there were different sorts of, I guess, variations of this species. Some of them are called robust, and some of them are called graceful or gracile. The robust ones were kind of sturdier skulls, more powerful jaws, and then we have examples where some of them were more slender with lighter jaws. So this is one kind of grouping of hominids, and we have a lot of evidence for these creatures. We have footprints. There is a very good example here of various footprint trackings that represent these hominids, and then of course here is a artist's reconstruction. We cannot know for sure exactly what these hominids look like, but using the same sort of reconstructive, artistic reconstructive, scientific reconstructive ideas that we use for, say, reconstructing forensic evidence, where police find a skull and reconstruct forensic evidence from that. If we use that same sort of modeling, we can get what we think is a fairly accurate picture of what these hominids may have looked like 3.5 million years ago. Bipedalism was an important part of hominins. Hominins began to walk long distances on 2 legs about 1.9 million years ago, and they began to become more and more upright. And there's a lot of debate as to what caused this change. A lot of scientists think it has to do with the increasing brain size. A lot of scientists think it has to do with changes in the environment, where perhaps the environment became more arid, and that led to more open grasslands, and so that favored creatures that stood up on 2 legs and could walk long distances. So we're not quite sure what exactly led to bipedalism. It was probably a combination of factors, but it began to be more prominent about 1.9 million years ago. Tool use is another important factor in hominins. You have all sorts of apes, including chimpanzees and orangutans and the like, that use tools, but more advanced tools began to be common with the hominids. So the use of sticks and stones, I've got a misspelling there, the use of sticks and stones and that type of thing can be found in chimpanzees and orangutans and things like that. But if you want to find more complex tool use, you have to look to the hominids to find that. The oldest definitive evidence of tool use would be some cut marks on animal bones found about 2.5 million years ago. So that is a long time ago, and early hominids were using a variety of tools even millions of years ago. The earliest fossils place our genus, which is Homo, ranging from about 2.4 to 1.6 million years ago. So our genus, we are called Homo sapiens, so our genus is Homo, and there's a number of species within this genus. The first of these fossils will be called Homo habilis. Homo habilis is called handyman because we found a much more extensive use of tools, lots of different examples of tools, and so this species was given the nickname handyman. Compared to the Australopiths, the Homo habilis had a shorter jaw and a larger brain volume, so we're beginning to look more and more like a modern day human, although we're still quite a bit of distance from that. Homo ergaster was the first fully bipedal large-brained hominid, existed about 1.9 to 1.5 million years ago. Homo ergaster also showed a significant decrease in what we call sexual dimorphism, which is where you have size difference between the sexes. Prior to some of these early hominids, like if you look at a male gorilla and a female gorilla, you're going to notice a pretty big difference in size. And so if you look at Homo ergaster and then some of the hominids after that, you begin to see less of this huge size difference between the sexes. Also, Homo ergaster had increased brain size, smaller teeth, longer, more developed legs and hips for walking and that type of thing. Homo ergaster fossils were previously assigned to Homo erectus, but now we think that they were more separate, two separate species, so we consider them two separate species. Here's a good example of a Homo ergaster fossil. This is the Turkana. You can look up Turkana, T-U-R-K-A-N-A, and find some good information. This would be a young boy. I believe the estimated age of this boy when he died, this fossil, would have been maybe 8 to 10 years old, I believe. So if you look up Turkana, you can find some cool information on that particular fossil. Homo erectus originated in Africa about 1.8 million years ago and was the first hominid to leave Africa. So up to this point, all of these fossils have only been found in Africa, but beyond this point we start to find various hominid fossils in other parts of the world. And here's an artist's reconstruction of what Homo erectus may have looked like. You begin to have facial features that are more human-like, a little less ape-like, more like a creature that you might recognize as more human being-like. Another grouping that a lot of people are familiar with, and it's a pretty fascinating group to study, is the Neanderthals. The Neanderthals, the Homo neanderthalensis, difficult to say, lived in Europe and the Near East about 350,000 to 28,000 years ago. So we are getting very close to the modern age, and the Neanderthals were very well known, and we have studied them quite a bit, group that lived in parts of Europe, so well out of Africa, thick-boned, large brains. They had some distinct things that made them unique, like they buried their dead, and they had hunting tools and rituals and things that very similar to Homo sapiens. Debate is ongoing about the extent to which genetic material was exchanged between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, but there is quite a bit of genetic data that shows that these two groups of hominids did interbreed. And so there's recent genetic testing that shows that the genomes of people living outside of Africa, so that would be anyone whose ancestry is not directly from Africa, that would be myself or anyone else who came from European descent, that people living outside of Africa today are composed of anywhere between 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. So somewhere in your background, in your ancient relatives, there was some interbreeding between these two groups of hominids, between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. Finally, we get to our species, the species that we know as human beings, currently extant human beings, Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens first appeared in Africa about 195,000 years ago, and all currently living humans are direct descendants from these African ancestors. And here is a 160,000-year-old fossil of Homo sapien right here. The oldest fossils of Homo sapiens outside of Africa date back to about 115,000 years and are found in the Middle East, and humans didn't arrive to the New World, which would be, say, the Americas, until sometime before about 15,000 years ago. In 2004, 18,000-year-old fossils were found in Indonesia, and a new small hominid was named. So there were some new fossils that were recently found in the 2000s, and this, at first, they thought it was like maybe a dwarf version of Homo sapiens, but now most scientists have agreed that this is a separate type of hominid, a smaller hominid called Homo floresiensis. I'm going to mispronounce that one either. So sometimes called the hobbit because of its small size. Homo sapiens were the first group to show evidence of symbolic and sophisticated thought. While Neanderthals did show some evidence of some fairly sophisticated things like burying their dead and the like, Homo sapiens were the first really to show what you might consider artistic endeavors. In 2002, a 77,000-year-old artistic carving was found in South Africa, as you can see here, and it has no purpose other than what you might consider artistic purpose. And art is kind of a hallmark of Homo sapiens, of humankind. About 36,000 years ago, humans were producing amazing cave paintings that have been found in France and other areas. So when you say cavemen and you think about cave paintings, these were Homo sapiens. They were not other hominids. They were Homo sapiens. This would have been about 36,000 years ago. And we're going to end right there. And I want you to understand that even though we have studied everything from archaea all the way through to bacteria, and our chapters on biological diversity kind of end here with humans and talking about Homo sapiens, I certainly don't want to imply that life and evolution is like some sort of ladder leading from bacteria up to humans, as if we start with the lowly bacteria and we finally end up at the highest point of the ladder with lofty humans. That's not it at all. You need to think about biology and living creatures again as this tree of life. We are but one tiny little tip of a branch on this tree of life. We are outnumbered by almost every other form of life, insects and bacteria, and there were at one time many different hominids that lived here on Earth. We just happen to be the existing branch that is currently surviving. We've evolved from ancestors that we share in common with countless other species, many of them extinct, as a matter of fact the vast majority of them extinct, some still alive. And for me, I know some people don't like this idea or they balk at this idea, but for me, I enjoy this idea. I find that there is, for me personally, awe and gratitude in this knowledge that I am related to all other living creatures. Everything from the oak tree to the insects crawling on that oak tree to the primates and apes that I see in National Geographic shows and the like. I enjoy the fact that there is scientific evidence that relates me to all other life on the planet. We're going to stop right there. This is a huge chapter. Focus on the groups and what make those groups unique. I threw in these slides as well just to kind of show you again those groups. Don't try to get caught up in the details, but kind of know the big picture ideas of what make these groups unique. So what makes a reptile a reptile? What makes a chordate a chordate? What makes a amniote an amniote? What makes let's see, let me give another good example. A craniate. So that type of thing. Don't get caught up in the tiny little details. Use the chapter summaries, and certainly you should make good use of the crash course videos and the like. And if you have any questions, let me know. Good luck on your test. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.